and welcome to the first new season 2, we'll say, of the Non-Existent Story here in the year of our Lord 2017. And my name is Casey. I am in Chicago in my home, and I'm talking to my sister Hannah, who will be presenting today, and who is still living in a hotel because she is an outcast from society, as writers generally are. So, Hannah, what have you brought us today?
2 stories coming. Not my hotel's in Alaska, so I'm even more lost in the sauce than you had originally implied. All right.
You're an outcast within Alaska.
Yep, I'm a cold outcast.
No, but I mean, usually that's like the periphery. Anyway, you're like on the periphery of the periphery.
Way out there. But now I shall present my story 1 for your guessing pleasure.
Okay. Is there like a theme or a topic?
Yes, but you have to guess it.
Oh.
I'm tired of giving you these free bits of information.
My story is,
All right, here we go. My favorite stories, in Ovid's verse, describe metamorphosis as the culmination of relentless, heedless desire. Too often, though, metamorphosis is only a whim of the gods. I disliked, for instance, the story of Narcissus, the boy who had fallen in love with himself. In Ovid's version, it is inseparable from the story of Echo, though in more popular versions it stands on its own. Echo was a talkative nymph whose only sin was that she made the mistake of trying to distract Juno during one of Jove's dalliances. In her jealous rage, Juno had taken away the nymph's power of speech, but she had not simply turned her into a mute. She had taken from her the power to speak first. Condemned only to repeat what she heard, Echo took to hiding, it was said, in woods and mountain caves, where she grew gaunt with loneliness until, at the even crueler whim of fate, she laid eyes on Narcissus. Narcissus was the son of a water god, who was said to be more beautiful than the nymphs themselves. Echo fell madly in love with him, and followed him in silence for days, until at last he turned and looked behind him. "Is anybody here?" he asked. "Here," she answered, joyfully echoing back. She must have thought herself, in that moment, beautiful again, for she stepped out into the open, and Narcissus saw the wretched, elusive creature she had become. He turned away in horror, and Echo withered from that day forward, consumed with shame, until only her voice remained. The other nymphs, long sympathetic to her plight, demanded of the gods that Narcissus meet a similar fate, but Narcissus was too beautiful for anyone to spurn him the way he had Echo. His end was much more gentle. Drinking from a pool of the water he was born from, he is said to have seen his reflection and, believing it was another water spirit, fallen in love with himself. Though the water spirit seemed to return his affection exactly, he would not approach, and Narcissus, paralyzed with longing, was riveted to the spot and turned into a flower bearing his name. I always thought Narcissus, wasting his youth in vanity, had committed a worse crime than Echo, who was only trying to protect another nymph from Juno's wrath. Ovid never says that Echo lied to Juno, only that she distracts her. But in the end, it is Echo who is punished, doomed to live the rest of her life in the shadows, while Narcissus becomes a perennial flower as immortal as springtime. And so ends story 1. Questions?
Are these canonical renditions of the myths? Are there variations? I know Echo and I know Narcissus more or less. I don't remember an overlap between them.
There's multiple versions of it. This is accurate to Ovid's version.
Okay. Metamorphosis. It's faithful to Metamorphoses of Ovid. Okay. Then, and we know nothing else of the narrator besides his or her opinion about these 2 myths.
Exactly so.
Okay. All right. I am ready for story 2.
Okay. Story 2. I waited for the car to stop and someone to open the trunk, for an impersonal hand behind an impersonal gun to shoot me with an impersonal bullet. But that was hours ago. Now I rocked with the traffic. I was tragicum heros. I had spun my thread and, as a spider, wove my ancient web. It had been my best work in journalism. A bold piece, uncompromising. A pothole slammed my head against the carpeted interior. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Arachne had been a storyteller too, a weaver of stories. Our problem was they weren't our stories to weave. They were the gods. Arachne boasted that she wove better than even Athena, goddess of wisdom, craft, and war, until Athena darkened her door and spoke as gods who darken mortal doors still speak. You can never compare to the gods. Beg forgiveness that I might spare your soul. I tumbled when the car swerved from pavement to gravel. Arachne foolishly persisted, I speak only truth. If you think otherwise, challenge me yourself. So Athena wove a scene of great contest between gods and mortals, in which the gods punished the mortals for thinking themselves equals. I twisted at my bound wrists to regain some feeling. Arachne countered with a tapestry depicting the gods as misleaders and abusers of mortals, particularly Zeus, celestial rapist and seducer of mortal women. Arachne had not only insulted the gods, of course, but had done so in a work far more beautiful than Athena's, and the goddess was enraged. She tore the tapestry to pieces, and Arachne, heartbroken, hanged herself. Considering my own dilemma, I must admit, a smarter move than witness protection. But Athena's wrath was not assuaged. Live on then, she cursed, and yet hang, condemned one. But, lest you are careless in the future, this same condition is declared, in punishment, against your descendants to the last generation. At her words, Arachne's hair fell out, and her head shrank to the smallest size. Her whole body became tiny, and her slender fingers poked from her sides like legs. The rest was belly, from which she spins her thread and, as a spider, weaves her ancient web. To show, I thought, as the car finally stopped, how gods punish those who are mortal. And so concludes excerpt 2.
Ooh. Well, so I've always liked the Ovid tales, particular. I can't tell exactly why. Maybe because I read some of them in Latin in high school, and I found them like very accessible and yeah, something about the connection with the natural world, I think, appealed to me. But all right, so this is tricky. We have two kind of different ways of interpreting these myths that are both very direct, right? So in the first one, we have this first person narrator who's basically just doing a commentary on their reading and expressing opinion, and there's just a sense of kind of pathos in the extremely unfortunate fate of Echo, who becomes I think she's already kind of sympathetic, becomes like even more kind of pathetic, or to be pitied in this one. And the first one, in the first one, the concern seems to be that like somehow the beautiful people don't get punished as they should. Whereas, like, so just because you're good looking, you can get away with quite a lot, and in fact, it actually makes you kind of a worse person. Whereas, or being, whereas if you are kind of defending one of your peers, your fate is actually much more desolate. So I don't know. I found like this particular rendition of Echo's plight to be particularly moving. But I can't really remember how I felt, or if I even read the whole story before. But I really like that. So there's just this sense of like kind of like a first person narrator who's just sort of like comparing the kind of crimes and maybe trying to get a sense of like the injustice of the gods or of fate. But it's very the narrator is very modest in making any sorts of like judgments beyond that. So yeah, it's almost hard to say like what the story would be there. You'd have to do a bit more work. I mean, is that a fair that the concerns in the first one seem to be a certain sense of what is just, or which punishments are really comparable, and this kind of contrast between like the gaunt, emaciated Echo and then Narcissus. So, uh, does that seem to be like a fair?
Yeah, I think that there's a preoccupation with the modern reader of these older of the tales in the Metamorphosis. I think they were originally written as explanations of why things are the way they are, and there was no really concern given to whether that they were fair or if they met our. They made the reader feel any sense of satisfaction at, well, then I am happy with how that came to be. So I think that that's kind of an interesting twist that modern readers bring to the table when they read these older stories. That wasn't a consideration that people had when they wrote them, or when they made them up in the first place.
Right. Like, yeah, I think that's like actually really interesting that there's kind of, well, maybe what's at stake in the first one is just this sort of almost a misreading. Or but also like, I mean, it puts into play a distinction between like notions of morality. So like for the Greeks, for example, inner beauty would be manifested in outward beauty. And so a good person was a beautiful person, and if you weren't beautiful, then you also weren't good, because then we would know.
Yeah, so, not even modern Greeks. I mean, that continued when you read the Canterbury Tales even, and there's a word for this, personification of inward attributes into reflection of outward attributes, where certain characters, if they have a particular deformity or a gap between their teeth, or that's supposed to symbolize different things about their personality.
It's interesting because I'm teaching a class on colonial Latin American literature right now, and we were talking about these things that exist that are called casta paintings from like 18th century Mexico, when it was called New Spain and not Mexico, which lasted for about 300 years. But one of they're kind of inventing a notion of race, but it's not a notion of race that we have. It's more about dividing people. I mean, it's a racist, caste system, but the notion is different because it's about dividing people into different categories of quality based on the purity of blood, which has in turn to do with like how Catholic they are and how European they are, but their associations with violence and degradation and sin that are then associated with different non-white races. So it actually kind of perpetuates more like a classical notion of race as opposed to like a biological notion that we have like from the 19th century forward. So anyway, that made me think about that, or that's why I had that present. But the Echo's plight and the plight of being either invisible or hideous, and then only being able to answer in repetition is particularly cruel somehow. And they're always eternal punishments. Like they just keep going, right?
Yeah, they never end. It's for always.
So like for like a Greek person, let's say, again, I'm not a classicist, but like most of natural phenomenon are explained in terms of a punishment. Someone has been punished, and that's why this happens.
Yes, because someone messed up, and that's why this natural phenomenon exists. This is why, I mean, voices.
The beauties of the universe. It's like living in a kind of a torture chamber, though.
Well, no, it makes sense. I mean, like, I imagine it would make sense. The ancient mind is, or the ancient life is what, short and brutal. So it makes sense that all of their creationist stories would have the origin of something dark and kind of tragic, without any sense of like morality or having like a being that has any care other than its own personal whims, of which you are not a concern. I think makes sense.
It's perhaps usually we would think maybe of like the Dark Ages or like medieval era as being particularly dark and poor quality of life, and the classical era is always associated with light and these big airy solid sections. But if every natural phenomenon is actually something being punished and wailing eternally in everlasting torment, then the world that you live in is actually rather infernal. like basically a torture chamber. A very pretty one, but one nonetheless. So anyway, that was the first one, and then the second one is where you get again this sense of someone perhaps distortingly interpreting their own, interpreting a myth. This time, the myth of Arachne and the weaving of the stories. And is this one also fairly faithful to the Ovidian, or are there some important departures?
No, it's also accurate.
Okay. So the idea is that there's someone, he or she is under a witness protection program, and for being a journalist, or there's a sense of like investigating a story, right? And then we're assuming that the person is in the car of like the FBI and is under some sort of care or custody, and not in fact being like abducted by, nefarious villains, right?
No, they're in the trunk of a car.
Oh, in the trunk. So
yeah.
No. Okay. All right. So I'm assuming incorrectly. So they're in the trunk. All right. The witness protection program seems to have not worked this time, but it's all kind of in the cards, because we're again back in this like fatalistic notion of like fortune's wheels spinning, and like so someone trying to make sense of their circumstances through the myth of Arachne and the weaving of stories. Am I missing anything important?
No, I think you've got the basis.
Okay. Okay. So is this, do you think that they're, because they're both kind of, let's say, a contemporary reader, in one case more advertently, in one case less advertently, like making sense of their own situation through the realm of like Greek myth. Is there any indication in like the second one as to why particularly Arachne would be the...
Well, with that one, you get the tie, I think, with the storytelling component, or you could even look at it for the artistic component. So the tale of Arachne and Athena is that they have a duel, really they have a weaving duel. So imagine they're creating their own separate tapestries to see who is the more talented. So it's kind of like a refabrication, I want to say. It's you're recreating art and then comparing it, and it's a way of telling a story. A lot of, I think, our older stories are inherited not through language so much as art. So looking
like
at
a visual practice of storytelling, you mean?
Arachne is the original Greek weaver of stories, and then how she came to the tragic end that she came to, but also having a sort of legacy, a very dark legacy, but still the legacy of the weaving the same ancient web over and over again, and all of her spidery descendants doing the same thing. I think that there's a kind of an internalized legacy there that then you can easily project into different art forms. Writing would be the one in this instance.
Well, and this notion of writing in some sort of transgression sense, right? So like any challenge of the gods is always a bad idea. Like never, don't try this at home. Like never challenge the gods to any sort of competition. It goes really badly. You always lose. But there is
but what is it? Hubris is always, it seems, the downfall of the Greek hero. The tragic hero is one who's committed hubris 9 times out of 10. In fact, maybe 10 times out of 10. I think it's always hubris.
I'm pretty sure it's like, I don't know. Again, I don't have a sort of encyclopedic knowledge of Greek myth, but I think it is interesting how you could see you could adapt that particular conflict or form of hubris or daring or transgression or provocation or whatever to like someone having published or investigated something that they weren't supposed to and kind of getting into trouble with that. So I mean, who knows if the witness protection is in fact the one that could be in fact the ones that are taking care of her or him, and not the other way around. Like there's a sense of just like maybe someone has published a story that is causing someone trouble, but the story is out, let's say. I don't know, imagine kind of a Fletch scenario. Maybe I'm like, oh, on this. And then like they've been, abducted, and it could be by the police who are corrupt, or it could be by the FBI who's even more corrupt, or God forbid the CIA, or it could actually, they could have been gotten. They have any number of enemies, but the story has been woven, and so there's a certain grim satisfaction in myth. Like myth is, I don't know if it's a source of comfort. It's a way of interpreting one's reality, I suppose.
But yeah, and I mean, also the struggle of it shows us that no matter what you do, or if you win or you lose, you're still doomed. You're still screwed.
Well, it's realistic.
Yeah. She won the duel, and as a result, she committed suicide and was turned into a spider.
I think it might be worse if you win, then they get quite upset. Generally, these capricious gods. Yeah, so I should guess. It's really a toss-up. Basically, just because there's an additional narrative element in the second one that the first one abstains from presenting. I'm going to guess that you wrote the second one.
I did write the second one.
Yay! Yay! I know we should. This is where we'd have a sound effect or something, or like there'd be like confetti. or fireworks. Americans love fireworks. I know that you're not really in continental U.S. anymore. Do they like fireworks?
We like fireworks here too. There's fireworks stands all over the place.
Thank God.
Yes, so it works perfectly. It works perfectly.
I was worried. You might not have enough explosives to combat the bears.
Well, don't worry about that anymore, because we do. And they're colorful. Although in a pinch, you can use a road flare. Just point it up.
Well, and they produce heat, at least briefly. So
yeah,
that could be an appeal.
Well, it's all, yeah.
Well,
it's such a festive place.
Well, it is dark for like 19 hours or something, right?
During the solstice, like 22 hours, but it's getting lighter now.
Well, I'm sure there must be some Greek myth that explains who did something to make it dark that long, and we'll find out.
Well, I mean, there's the myth of Persephone and Hades.
Oh, that's the season ones, right? Orpheus, isn't it Orpheus?
Or yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Well, I confuse my Greek and my Roman, because the Romans would say Hades, the Greeks would say
also Hades. I think no, he's Pluto. Pluto is the Romans.
Is it?
I'm pretty sure that Pluto, because it used to be a planet.
Yes, there are many planets involved. I thought
it was like the Alaska of the solar system.
No, I thought Pluto was the messenger with the little winged feet.
No, that's Hermes.
Hermes. Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
I didn't take Latin in high school, so
I don't think I learned this in Latin.
No.
I think I learned it from. I don't even know. So you just absorb some of this stuff, Like like Shakespeare. There's a lot of Shakespeare that I kind of am familiar with that I very vaguely, but I've never read. But tell me who wrote the first one, and then tell me more about the second one, because it's a bit of a cliffhanger. It's like a little peek into this.
Yeah. Okay. So the first one, that's an excerpt from a novel called "Among Other Things, I've Taken Up Smoking," which I thought was a very clever title. And something, I forgot to write down the author and I have such a tentative internet connection.
Oh, here, I'll look it up. So keep talking.
Yeah. Oh, I can't pronounce her name anyway. Aoibheann Sweeney, something like that. It's not spelled like it sounds, so you'll have to look it up.
Oh, Aoibheann, Irish?
African? I don't know. But it's an interesting novel, not the best that I've read. I was attracted to it specifically because of her references, of which there are many, to different Greek mythologies. The backstory of that being that the main character's father is a translator of all of Ovid's many books within the Metamorphoses. There's like a lot of them, apparently, and she references them all the time. And it's an interesting novel. I wouldn't recommend that you not read it.
Well, this is glowing. Oh, where is my Amazon Prime
It's got a surprise reveal at the end, which I didn't quite see coming. So I mean, it's not bad. I guess I felt like I didn't know what I was expecting, and then it hit me, and I was like, oh, it was like a Terra mask off at the end kind of deal. But I mean, it was well done. So
did you check this out of the library?
It's more like a young adult coming of age type novel.
Ah, okay. How did you encounter this book?
I saw it and I thought the title sounded cool, and so I bought it and I read it, and I have no regrets.
No, you have to risk yourself in these ways. Well, you went so far as to buy it. Look at that. I've definitely bought books for less good reasons. But yeah, no, I'm also kind of attracted to that title, oddly. So it's kind of an adolescent who interprets her world through the filter or the reference point of the Metamorphoses.
Well, I think that it was a big influence on her life. Her father, because she had a very isolated life. Her mother commits suicide when she's very young, and she lives on this kind of tiny island off the coast of Maine with her father. It's just them on this little island in this cabin, and he translates. He does his translations, and she sometimes will help him type. And so that's been her whole life until she graduates from high school, and then she ends up going to New York to work in a museum that her father used to work in, and kind of gets exposed to the academic culture that he was involved with, and
runs away in terror for the hills, and then
and for people who are becoming intrigued, I don't want to give it away, because there is sort of a surprise ending. I would feel almost bad. But it is definitely interesting. And there's tons of kind of gems of different references. And that was just the only one she made to that particular story. But I really liked it. And so I thought I would try my own. And with the second story, I think that the trick with just providing excerpts as opposed to backup story and then excerpt is that you feel compelled to give more backstory within your excerpt of what's actually going on. And it's actually it's difficult to find passages in novels like that, maybe more so like very short stories, but novels it's very hard. So I found myself trying to add little details and suggestions that wouldn't have necessarily been there in a longer story. So that was difficult for me, but I had to, because I wanted to be invested in what I was writing. In fact, I ended up doing a lot of deletion too for my excerpt because I didn't want it to go on forever.
It sounded very, very good. It sounded very polished, and I liked the and it was very well phrased. It is hard to not orient the reader or the imaginary reader. Like there's this sense to kind of like wanting to set the scene for oneself. So yeah, I could see that being difficult now that we're trying this new format. But I find that you are also drawn to kind of like espionage type things.
Oh, really?
Yes. That like there's a couple stories that you've done where I feel like this kind of like this sense of like intrigue or mystery or like I said, like a film noir kind of backdrop or scenario has been evoked a couple times. Not every time.
I like the action, man. You've gotta be engaging. It's gotta be exciting.
Yeah. Does it?
What's happening? What am I doing with my neck right now? Wow.
I know, right? Like kidnapping and like
dodging bullets and reading at the same time.
And arachne. I mean, that is how you live your life.
Yeah.
You know, very literary, but also full of events.
The
one does not preclude the other. And I think one of the things that I liked about both of them a lot is that they really like foreground. I don't know if you're like this, but frequently I find that fiction makes much more sense and is a much better. It's a thing that I think about a lot more than things that are happening in the actual world. I tend to filter or even just interpret everything in relationship to something that I'm reading. Or like if I write in a diary, 9 times out of 10 it'll be about something that I'm reading and not something that's happening. And that could mean that my life is not eventful enough. But for some reason it seems more vivid to me if I read it.
I don't think so. I think that makes sense because I think that life by and large doesn't have any rhyme or reason to it. And so everybody has to have their way of interpreting it so that they have to have a formula they can apply so that it makes sense. And I mean, that can fluctuate, or it can be very, very black and white and rigid. I mean, that's why religions exist, I think.
Yeah, so, no, there's all kinds of ideologies or orientations.
There's so many different ways that people have tried to do that. And I do like, Stephen Fry also thinks that what did he say? That if he were to believe in any god or gods, it would have to be those of the ancient Greeks and Romans because they were cold and uncaring and vicious, and they were constantly in their minds. And that's the only way that the world and what happens in it would make sense if there were higher powers to begin with.
Capricious, vain, insecure, horny beings are running everything.
Yeah, so if they're the ones in control, then this makes sense. And I need somebody to be in control that's not me because I don't know what I'm doing, so the logic goes. So yes. I do like stories that more blatantly are applying or attempting to apply that sense of logic so that everything that happens around them makes some kind of sense. I think everybody needs that. I don't say that to say we should disregard that completely and just kind of accept that nothing has meaning.
Oh, no, we use narratives to make sense of things a lot. And I think, yeah, like you said, like a religion is a narrative that makes sense of things and so forth. But I guess what I was just saying is that there's an event in a book, however minor, it can be much more vivid to me than something that I see like on the Red Line in Chicago. And that's saying a lot because I see some crazy shit on the Red Line in Chicago. So, but for whatever reason, I think because there's the aspect that because you read it, you create the image. And so it's like your little baby too. So you tend to favor it perhaps more. So if you were to interpret your life right now in relationship to a Greek myth or any myth, Greek or Roman, the Romans didn't make up any new myths. They just stole myths. What myth would you think you would appeal to?
I'm sure it's one that no one ever bothered to write because nothing much happened in it, which is how I feel about mine right now as I sit in my hotel room in Alaska.
But I feel like a lot of them are about waiting, right? Like, aren't there lots of waiting tests?
That's been the recurring theme. It would be a waiting one.
You could be one of it's kind of the waiting room.
Yeah.
Olympus.
It would be the myth of Beetlejuice sitting in the waiting room surrounded by all of these like dead people who are waiting with their little stub like they're at the DMV. and they're calling number 7 and he's number 9003. And he's just looking around and starts getting into trouble. That would be my myth for my life.
Okay, that's when next time you're in a car trunk, that's what you can contemplate.
I think so.
to give it all a sense of meaning. So basically Hades.
but with its humorous moments.
Oh yes. Well, I think it has more humorous moments than like the Judeo-Christian hell, at least. So there's that. Titles. Well, we know the first one. Among other things, taking up smoking, and then your title.
I don't know yet. I played around with it, and I couldn't come up with anything except maybe adventures in crime journalism. But that makes me think too much of like, I don't know. What was that one cartoon show of the Carmen around the world or something?
Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Yeah,
it could be.
Just say Carmen Sandiego is in the trunk. That can be where she is.
Yeah. So I'm like feeling really pulled between those two titles.
So this is actually a novel about Carmen Sandiego. She wears a trench coat. She has shoulder-length red hair, sunglasses, fedora. You know. She likes a rock knee.
The hats are very important.
Yes, the low brim. Well, thank you for relaunching this season 2 of the Non-Existent Story. We're gonna escalate things here, but also make them shorter. I didn't keep track of the time, but I'm imagining that we're around half an hour. So I will bid our listeners or the internet in general adieu.
Adieu and good night.
And good luck.
And good luck. One small step for man.
Yes, find your myth.